what makes these agents truly agentic, so to speak, as opposed to, like, say, a dashboard or a smart assistant? Or
This AI is not really waiting for a human to ask a question. The AI is constantly monitoring these signals and identifying these interventions in real time.
how do you ensure consent, trust, when AI agents initiate something as sensitive as, like, a retention intervention or a peer mentoring connection?
Anything that we do agentic, have the right level of consent, and at any point they can rescind their consent.
What does success for one of these agents look like?
For a mentorship matching intervention, you could be looking at savings between 20 to 30K.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast, the show where we help leaders keep work human in the era of AI. I'm your host, David Rice, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Dan George and Francisco Marin from Cognitive Talent Solutions. Dan and Francisco share how their agents are proactively launching real interventions, like matching mentors with new hires, identifying burnout risk, and accelerating onboarding with built-in consent, transparency, and measurable ROI. You'll hear real use cases, learn how minimal data can unlock real value, and get a peek at what a second generation of agents could mean for the future of work. Plus, we explore the grassroots movement behind the Network First Manifesto and what it signals about the evolving role of structure, hierarchy, and human connection in the workplace. We're going to dive into what it really means to bring agentic AI into HR and why it's more than just dashboards and assistants. All right, Francisco, Dan, welcome. Good to have you on the show. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to start by talking about sort of the vision that you all have with Cognitive Talent Solutions. So why these 8 agents? What were the sort of key areas that you were looking to address when you look at HR as a whole?
So, from our perspective, there are plenty of ways that AI agents could be effective within HR, but these 8 were some of the most, kind of obvious that we could not only easily collect consent and ensure that all parties involved in the process, were willing and able, but additionally, they were some of the ones that we could track an ROI specifically, to how they impact the overall operations of HR and even the necessary aspects of being a first generation output. So we didn't want to go too crazy, but we wanted to obviously try to make an impact, but also knowing that, all this is going to evolve eventually. So these 8 were by far kind of the ones that made the most sense.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Dan shared. And just to complement it a little bit, we observed that there were some agentic AI capabilities deployed for core HR processes like payroll or regulatory compliance, but we were missing that generation of use cases that affect people analytics, and especially those that were aligned with the network framework that we use at CTS, right? So how they could help us rethink some of the key processes as change management, leadership development, or onboarding in terms of social activation. So we pick up this group of 8. We get a lot of traction. We can discuss later on that with the onboarding one, with the mentorship matcher. But we felt that it was a group of use cases that reflected the message that, hey, this is the new wave of agentic AI capabilities for the people analytics industry as a whole, beyond the field of organizational network analysis.
Yeah.
Dan, you mentioned their consent. How do you ensure consent, trust, transparency when AI agents initiate something as sensitive as, like, a retention intervention or a peer mentoring connection?
Exactly. And so, that was kind of one of our, preemptive thoughts on all of this, is that we've got to make, anything that we do agentic, have the right level of consent and ethical use of, kind of these automatic processes. So one of the best ways that we look to do it is, throughout our platform, we'll take in, obviously the surveys and emails aspects of both the takers and the other people within the org. And so when the agent sees a specific criteria, it can launch automated email that can be generated by one of the administrators. And so, they can start it, or they can just start the whole process of all the signatures that were identified. But both parties, would then receive an email that they click the button and consent to. So with that, we've, notified both. They've given their consent to start this process, and at any point they can rescind their consent so that we stay not only compliant with GDPR, but just compliant with overall kind of ethical use.
Yeah, and also like we had ongoing discussions with the team about some of the nuances of each use case separately, right?
Yeah.
Because in the case of talent retention, for example, we had the discussion of, well, does it make sense to provide these insights at aggregate level? Say, hey, you have a certain team based on the signals that we are seeing that has a high risk of attrition, and these are some of the actions that you can implement. Or does it make sense to do it at individual level and notify the immediate supervisor? In some cases, we are testing this at aggregate level. With others, we are doing it at individual level. And we're kind of like seeing what is the reaction that we get from the first companies that are piloting this and from the employees themselves. The principle here is to really, whenever possible, build these opt-in mechanisms. So if you identify as a mentor for a new hire, for example, you have to provide your consent to participate in the mentorship opportunity. And then like the other component there is like, what's the role that the immediate supervisor plays? Should the immediate supervisor be a gatekeeper that has to authorize the intervention, or should he or she be informed about this opportunity, having been identified, but being the mentor, for example, ultimately the person that has to provide the consent to participate in it? It's something that we're evolving, but the idea here is to be fully compliant with GDPR and other regulations, and also to build these opt-in mechanisms whenever possible.
Let's talk functionality for a second because I'm curious, like what makes these agents truly agentic, so to speak, as opposed to like say a dashboard or a smart assistant, or what are the things that sort of Gen AI is normally associated with?
I can take this one. So the idea here, as the name implies in agentic AI, is that the AI has more agency, right? So this AI is not really waiting for a human to analyze a dashboard or ask a question in order to basically come up with these questions proactively or identify these interventions. The human component is still needed to authorize the intervention from the platform, but the AI is constantly monitoring these signals and identifying these interventions in real time. And then it also can make context-aware decisions. So in some cases, you will have a number of metrics available. In other cases, there are other metrics available, but based on the universal metrics that the AI has access to, and within the retrieval augmented generation, basically in the framework, the overall agent orchestrator with the different use cases, it makes real-time decisions about how to compose these email notifications, how to make these interventions. So the level of agency that the AI has is way higher than, say, for example, in traditional generative AI interface, like the ones that we built previously in the platform.
You mentioned there that there's some pilots that you're doing. In those pilot studies, what are some of the agents that have shown the most immediate traction or really sparked the interest of the folks using them? And why do you think that is?
It's the mentorship matcher with onboarding. You want to take this one, Dan?
Yeah, for the most part, the mentorship matcher is by far probably one of
The
the
mentorship
lowest
matcher with
bars
onboarding. You
in
want to
terms
take this
of
one, Dan?
risk and or accident. So with this, and again, I'm a huge believer in having not just one mentor but multiple mentors on that. And I think again, for any organization looking for engagement with new hires or new managers, new people managers, having a mentor and being able to match with someone that is maybe not, in direct line or tangentially, associated with you, the mentorship measure really kind of looks to understand a little bit more about that individual, their level, where, kind of what some of their aspirations are, depending on, how in depth the active O&A survey is. And so with this one, both, potential mentee and mentor get these consent emails. They can both say, yes. And then that introduction kind of begins. And at scale, that just makes a lot of these things really easy because, again, I've run this process manually in the past. When I was a former CHRO, I've being in charge of, head of people analytics at different organizations. I've had to come up with lists and send them to, L&OD or other, talent engagement teams. And so having it as kind of an automated, authorized, spot where an admin can go and just be like, click, 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 it just makes the process that much easier and gets us out of just selecting the typical mentors and mentees that we, just always kind of go to, right off the bat. So overall, it's just probably one of the easiest, lowest risk and, most impactful, things that an organization can do for, again, for the price, it's incredible.
And people can grasp it conceptually very easily because all of us who have worked at a large multinational, we know that it makes a huge difference if the first person you interact with and that shows you the ropes in the organization. If it's a person that is inspiring and supportive and engaged, or if it's a person that is disengaged and maybe wants to leave the organization, maybe sees you as a competitor. And this is especially relevant nowadays because many new hires are joining in hybrid setups, right, without face-to-face interaction with their team. They're joining organizations that are going through a reorganization in real time, right? And it's a very uncertain environment where, it's critical to optimize the onboarding process to shorten the time to productivity of the new hire. And indeed, what we're doing here is to rethink onboarding as social activation.
It's very interesting. I can imagine on the enterprise level, like if you're a multinational, like you said, a lot of companies are hiring across borders now. This would be excellent for making those connections. So you mentioned when we were talking before this, these agents can start to identify burnout risks. They can automatically, like you said, connect somebody with a mentor or manager. So in terms of like the workflow itself of how it kind of does that, what does that look like in practice?
Maybe we can explain the workflow of the mentorship matcher, because that's the one that is right now operationally implemented across multiple companies, the one that we start using as a starting point, right? So the way it works basically is a new hire joins the organization. The AI identifies who's the person that is best positioned to be the mentor or buddy of this person. This identified based on metrics like, informal leadership that has been mapped previously through organizational network analysis is taken into consideration the role, the department, the level of performance, the years of experience. And the more data you feed the system, the more sophisticated and actionable the recommendations are, right? But once this matching has been identified, the intervention is showcased to the HR user on the cognitive network analyzer platform. And then the HR user has to authorize the beginning of this intervention. And the AI reaches out to the mentor to gather his or her consent to participate in this initiative, informing the first liner, which is at the same time asking for permission to the first liner for this to happen. If the mentor provides the consent, then the AI makes an email introduction between the mentor and the mentee, schedules a meeting so they get to know each other, and then documents whether the meeting has taken place or not, and assesses the impact of this intervention with specific savings in terms of shortening the time to productivity of the new hire. So that would be an example of a full agentic AI workflow for onboarding with the mentorship matcher.
So let's talk a little bit about outcomes. So what does success for one of these agents look like? Like what signals or results are you tracking to determine that?
So, overall on the impact, we have the research that's been out there for a long time and collected, what we believe are some pretty average ROIs as it, pertains to kind of these different scenarios. And as the agents complete their tasks and the people, again, for mentorship matcher, like they have their meetings and initial setup, it begins to kind of collect what, those counts and then applies a dollar amount to it. All that is aggregated kind of at the top of the dashboard. So for any HR admin or other admin of the system, they can see kind of what that is. And obviously, with the counts, they can apply their own ROI or change that ROI if they they want to kind of either add dollar amount or subtract dollar amount. But overall, we're looking at the aspect of an automated flow that takes into account, understands that all this thing is scheduled, coordinated, and executed upon, and that in of itself can save tens in depending on the size of the scope of the of the work group. Like it could be tens or hundreds of hours if depending on how long it's being run. And so all of that kind of ROI is kind of stationed there. All those metrics can be put into different dashboards or different presentation styles on the dashboard, so that they can then show impact with their team meetings or leadership stuff. So all that is aggregated so that everyone kind of understands the volume that's existed and executed upon.
I just had maybe just to add a bit more specific figures for a mentorship matching intervention. You could be looking at savings between 20 to 30K by shortening the time to productivity of a new hire by up to 40%. And again, this can be implemented at scale across every new hire in the organization. And then like right now, these AI agents are available in our self-service platform, Cognitive Network Analyzer, but we are going in the direction of integrating these AI agents natively in platforms like ServiceNow and Google, so that our clients can consume this within their existing IT infrastructure as well. And that's where these agents can interact with all the universe of, for example, case management information or HRSD in the employee workflows ecosystem within ServiceNow, right? So it's a very interesting and exciting period right now where we're going to be basically discovering these new use cases and getting a lot of feedback and getting these ready so that we can deploy ultimately all the 8 agents at scale and go beyond this initial pilot stage.
Yeah. And we've also got additional, interest from other CRMs as well. So the idea behind kind of adding this as a native app in their marketplaces, helps to just streamline the overall process for, using this, or leveraging this technology within their current ecosystems.
I imagine obviously there's a lot of interest from HR, but you mentioned there kind of the ability to talk to the rest of the C-suite and present to them. And I'm curious, are you seeing a lot of interest coming out of like operations and CEOs, things like that?
More and more conversations we have every week, every month is actually coming from outside of HR. Typically we have entered in through either people analytics professionals, other HR transformation, talent management professionals. But more and more, we started talking with, leaders outside of the HR function simply because they have an interest in understanding all the skill sets and networks of their employees so that they can speed up innovation, figure out how to collaborate better, understand kind of the cultural dynamics of their teams. And even, at the kind of most simple cases, for any change initiative, leaders can then understand who are our top influencers that we know or maybe don't know, and be able to tailor specific communications to those individuals and their networks, whether it's in the middle of the organization, the top, or, the lower aspects of the organization. Doesn't matter where there's influencers everywhere within the org, and being able to tap into those people to accelerate change adoption is just a huge use case for us.
From a technical perspective, because every organization, right, like the data and sort of infrastructure you're going to encounter might be a little bit different.
Sure.
So, what kinds of data and infrastructure do companies, where do they need to be essentially before they can realistically adopt these agents?
Well, that's a great question, because the entry barriers are much lower than people think. The beautiful thing here really is that we combine active O&A with passive O&A. Active O&A relying on online surveys, and passive O&A looking at aggregated metadata of collaborative tools like Microsoft, Google, Slack, and others, right? So in terms of specific metrics you need to have, really, like the most important would be the employee name, the email, the manager's name, the manager email, and then that's really about it. I mean, like in terms of being able to launch a pilot, then from there, any additional data that you add, department, division, performance, engagement, historical attrition data, right? The more, the better. But that's the beauty of the Agentic AI, that it's able to make context-aware decisions and work with the basic information that it has. Obviously, if the AI doesn't know who your manager is or what's the email, it's not going to be able to inform or write or provide these notifications. But many of these information is already by default in the API of Microsoft or Google, and then the data that you have available to complement it, the more the better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
we've
it's
had teams upload, rather simplistic hierarchy structures. And then we've had other clients that have uploaded, 2 or 3 separate hierarchies, depending on how they want to view their different organizations, and how they want to kind of understand and track kind of trends. And so with that, we're able to pretty much ingest any structure that makes sense for them. And I think that's kind of the beauty of how our specific LLM in the back end, and then again, if we're within one of those other kind of vendor systems, we can also kind of join in with those specific LLMs, so that holistically we have a couple different LLMs that are helping our specific O&A engine to analyze these networks.
And a good example would be, we recently worked with a Fortune 500 company. They had like 7 different metrics to define their teams, with this, supervisory org, 5, 6, 7, functional reports, direct reports, indirect reports, right? And the AI was able to make sense of all that universe of metrics that we were feeding it, right? And include this into the recommendations and the replies to the prompt, also with the generative AI component, which is another feature also that is making a big difference in the way that clients consume this type of insights.
I'm curious because, like, I've seen some research that suggests, like, HR folks in particular, they feel like maybe they're not qualified to use a lot of AI tools, right? Like, so, maybe they're not the data folks. And I'm wondering, have you faced any skepticism or resistance in bringing agentic AI into some of these, traditionally human-centered processes, and how have you dealt with that?
I would say so far, at least my experience is like it is very well understood that AI is going to play a critical role in the future of work. And now it doesn't matter if you work in HR, IT, or finance, you need to deal with this and you need to be exposed to this because this is going to impact your job in the short term. So it's that sense of urgency maybe that is kind of like lowering the resistance to adopt and be exposed to this type of technologies, at least compared to previous waves. For example, when we're probably the third company in the people analytics industry that integrated generative AI into our solutions. And there I saw some companies that were saying, hey, we love the technology, we want to use the technology, but we are not ready to add the generative AI component yet. But then those same companies, 2 months later, launch an agentic AI tender across the whole organization and think, oh, wow, this is different. Now they're getting it. Like they have to, be part of early adopters or they're out of the market. And I'm seeing like the mentality shifting in that regard. Also, I think it's because AI is just becoming a more important part of our daily lives. I think mostly generative AI versus agentic AI, but yeah, that has been my experience. Much lower resistance than I was expecting. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah. So I think there's two aspects of this. One is, we've designed our platform for any professional, whether you have an extensive understanding of the background and mathematics behind O&A and graph databases in theory is great. All the metrics that you would expect to find are there. However, what we display front and center on the platform in our reports, and what we can generate are all for individuals that don't have a ton of background on O&A, but understand kind of networks and that, just the connections and collaboration that needs to happen within any typical enterprise. So what we do is we kind of layer this in two separate ways. One is that, our general reports and impact metrics are very easy to understand. But if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, all the information is there too. You can download into different spreadsheets, so you can augment your current database or HR data warehouse with our information as easily as just uploading a new spreadsheet. And again, it doesn't matter if it's you're doing 300 people or 30,000. All this can be integrated within your system. So there is the aspect of both focusing on non-technical reports and insights, but also knowing that all the mathematics are there as well. And then kind of to point out for Francisco's, I would just recently was, with chatting with a customer that kind of that same thing. They wanted to start without the generative and agentic AI just simply because that's more comfortable to them. But then as soon as they started to kind of get more comfortable with the system, what was available, how their view of the survey and the results went, they were like, you know what, it really would be great to add this because of two main aspects. One is that it's in an environment that is kind of separate from their other major HR systems, so they know that since it's not a system wide AI tool, it's only confined to the space within that platform. And that just makes it a lot easier to kind of feel a bit safer about it not accessing stuff that it shouldn't, because only sent us the demographic information that they feel comfortable sharing outside of their system.
That message is key. Like we really reinforce the message when speaking with HR and other stakeholders that, hey, the users that have access to the platform are in complete control on how those insights are shared across the organization. You can authorize the intervention, not authorize it. You can share an executive summary in PDF format. You can completely customize by yourself what metrics, what insights, and what charts are included in the report. You can customize the scope of the report. So you are the gatekeeper and you decide basically how this is shared. And this resonates with many HR teams.
Yeah, I imagine that sort of customizable experience and being able to shape it around like the level of the person using it would be a big factor
Yeah.
in buying in. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is because I imagine that's taken a while to create all that and to develop that level of functionality. But where do you see this going next? Like, are there agentic capabilities that you're already dreaming about for the next wave, or?
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So sorry, I'll go first. And I know Francisco's very passionate.
yeah,
He's had a brilliant vision on this for a long time. Like I said, we've probably known each other 5 or 6 years now. We met before the pandemic and have been noodling on this for a long time. But I would say there's plenty of areas that I see where we can not only advance, the second generation of the 8 that we have right now, but then also dive into more as people kind of get more comfortable. But, we're also trying to match the pace of, what we're seeing, and, always trying to understand what trends are kind of the most popular or the most impactful for, for the moment. Kind of, I think from a competitive standpoint, I want to keep a couple of those closer to my chest, but overall, though, we're really excited about not only kind of this first generation, but the future second generation and any of the kind of following ones that we can come to fruition here.
yeah. I would say really, for me, the future organization, it's network that is powered by AI agents, right? Where AI agents are released to deploy these micro interventions at scale, right? And that opens that there's a component of large multinationals acting as incubators of this new way of work, what we call a network first future of work. And there is a component of new organizations being born and scaling, integrating these practices at scale, the same way that we are doing it at CTS, right? We're a team of 50 people, very decentralized community, including consultants, ambassadors, a core team here in California. But ultimately, we want to create a case study with the way that we manage CTS itself on how this new way of work looks like. And we even launched, not from CTS, but even at personal level, we launched a month ago this initiative called the Network First Manifesto, where we're inviting basically anybody that resonates with this concept of the network first future of work to draft this manifesto and create a series of principles. We were collaborating with thought leaders like Michael Arena, Andras from Event 7, and other people in the industry. We have right now a group of 200 people, 200 founding members with about 80 endorsing organizations, right? And this was just in a month. And we're going to have the ratification events on August 13, and then we're going to announce a series of next steps that are going to be very exciting. So that's really why we're doing this, right? Is how can we, within our limited capacity and influence, how can we spearhead the transition from a hierarchy first model to a network first future of work? Because at the end of the day, when a new hire joins an organization in the current environment, there is too restrictive insights on where you have to work, who you have to work with, where you have to work, when you have to work, right? It's a model that is grounded on collaborative control. It's not a model that is achieving a healthy balance between centralization and decentralization, between human capital and social capital. So what we're trying to do is to embed in these elements at structural level, so that the person that joins a large organization can have similar incentives and similar experience than if you were joining a early stage startup in Silicon Valley, right? That's what this is about creating a future of work that we are all excited about and not scared.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's amazing. I love Michael's work on networks. As he's done some really cool stuff. So, well, Dan, Francisco, thank you for joining us today. Before we go, I just want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find out more about what you all have going on and learn more about these agents.
Of course. You can visit communitytalentsolutions.com anytime. And we have also the newsletter on LinkedIn, CTS On Insights, where you can get articles to your email on a weekly basis. And then separately from CPS as well, we launched the Network First Manifesto initiative. It's networkfirstmanifesto.com or networkfirstmanifesto/join. And there you can learn about the initiative as well. And it's open to anybody that wants to be part of it.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us today. It's been a great talk.
Appreciate it, David.
Thank you, David.